Hi guys, thank you for joining the webinar here today. My name once again is Ed Zamora. I'll be doing today's presentation from Principia Prep on the college aid process. If you do have additional questions throughout the presentation, I'm going to provide you guys with my contact information at the end of the presentation as well. You can either call us, email us. Also, if you need help, we do provide assistance with the process. That being said, let's start today's presentation. So we're going to go over the landscape that we see a lot of families and students obviously dealing with everything going on in the world. We will also go over how admissions affects the financial aid process. Now that the SAT, ACT optional scenario is a lot more prevalent than it ever has been in the past, we're going to go through that, how that affects financial aid, as well as your college list, the safety, target, and reach schools, how they affect the financial aid process. We're also going to go over appealing financial aid. Also, we're going to discuss today the FAFSA form, the CSS profile, as well as the state forms out there that you guys need to fill out for financial aid consideration. We're also going to go through scams and frauds and pitfalls that we see families fall for every year that hopefully after today you guys will be able to avoid, as well as the student loan process, how it works, the private lenders versus the federal lenders, etc. That being said, also we're going to discuss the financial aid resources out there for scholarships and other things out there to help you guys hopefully pay for the college process. That being said, one thing that we were asked probably for the last 5 years or so now is that we create a YouTube channel and that we actually add all our videos on there, especially the presentations we're doing here for the high school. This video here will be added to the YouTube channel we created about 6 months ago or so. We actually have about 30 different videos now of different topics that parents have asked for. If you want to watch this video, we will be posting it on YouTube today or tomorrow. If you wouldn't mind, just go to YouTube, just type in Ed Zamora. You'll pop up, basically the screen you see now will pop up. It'll show you all the different content we have on there. We have videos about looking for scholarships. We have videos about appealing for scholarships and grants. We have videos on the financial aid forms, about work study. We have videos about pretty much everything. So if you want to see additional content, basically just follow us on YouTube. You can actually subscribe and it notifies you. We typically do a new video every week or two about different questions parents email us in. Now that being said, let's go over essentially the landscape of the college process that we've seen over the last 6 months. There's basically 3 different types of students now, good, bad, or indifferent. There's the recent graduates, there's the students returning to college this year, 2021, and then you have the seniors and juniors in high school. We're going to go down the list and I'm going to explain to you kind of what each group means and the benefits and negatives. Now, when it comes to the biggest group now that has, I guess, good, bad, or indifferent, the most problems, essentially what we're seeing across the board, is the students who've just graduated college, mainly because of the high unemployment. A lot of jobs are being rescinded, a lot of companies are going under, a lot of co-ops, a lot of internships are being canceled, as well as on top of all those situations that the recent graduates from the college side are facing, they're also facing the fact that in December, all the forgiveness and all the loan forbearance, when you're not making any payments, not having an interest accrued on your interest on your loans themselves, that all goes away after December. So it means basically in about 4 months, these students will have to start paying back student loan debt, which they may or may not have jobs for. Recent college grads have it very, very difficult. The second difficult group of the students out there is the students who are returning back to college, mainly because of the fact that the students returning back to college are returning back to something they've never dealt with. Students that are now being quarantined, schools that are having online courses only, colleges that are shutting down. As you can probably see from the news, Notre Dame, Michigan State, Chapel Hill, now Wisconsin, schools across the board are all having difficulty with the situation happening. So that we consider the second worst group out there of students because of the fact that college lifestyle they're used to, the socializing, the football games, the tailgating, the indoor classrooms, events, everything else, none of that stuff's going to happen, unfortunately. So it's going to be very difficult on these students because they already experienced the college lifestyle. Now, the third group of students, what we're dealing with today, obviously for the high school presentations on the financial aid admissions process here, is the high school seniors and juniors. And these students are technically in the best case scenario of students for a bunch of different reasons. Right off the bat, one of the biggest benefits is the SAT, ACT. A majority of schools have now gone SAT, ACT optional, which means you have a huge barrier, which a lot of students couldn't deal with in the past, to get into college, and also for scholarship consideration is no longer there anymore. So that's one big barrier out of the way. A second big barrier for a lot of students is if you didn't have enough community service or volunteer work or leadership, whether it be for scholarship criteria, whether it be for admissions, that is also out of the way because a lot of students can't do anything because of what's going on with the pandemic. So in the grand scheme of things, the seniors and junior students in high school actually have the best case scenario of the student body out there. For juniors and seniors, class rigor and GPA, those are going to be the 2 most important things on the admissions side, specifically for this year, 2021, because a lot of you guys can't do the SATs or ACTs. For juniors, it's probably going to be the same way as well. The class rigor, the APs, the honors, the IB tracks, these will be the most beneficial things you can do to help yourself on the admissions side. Now, once again, this is going to be a very competitive year because of everything that's going on. I would definitely look for seniors this year, for 2021, to get out my applications as soon as possible. The earlier you get your applications out there, the better your situation is going to be, because there's probably going to be less competition out there because there's a ton of students who haven't even seen these colleges yet. Now, that being said, let's talk about the actual admissions process and basically the factors involved in deciding whether we should go early decision, early action, regular, rolling, etc. Now, you might be wondering, let's talk about early decision and early action first. When it comes to early decision, this is the locked-in scenario. So if you apply to the college early decision, you get accepted, you have to go. Now, early action, you get accepted to the college early on as well, but you don't have to go. Now, with there's being so much of this, unforeseen things happening where students couldn't see the campus, students couldn't take tests. If you are considering doing early decision for college, because in many cases it increases the chance of getting into early decision, this is probably one of the best years to do it because of so many students not being able to see a college that they're willing not to take the early decision shot. So this year might be the lightest early decision pool competitiveness that there's ever been. So that's one thing to consider with early decision. So from an early decision point of view, a lot of parents are asking from the financial side, well, if we do get locked in, Ed, how do we know the financial aid? Is it going to be available? Can we even afford the college? And it's a very simple way of doing that. It's called the net price calculator. I have a slide I'm going to go over in about 15 minutes just on a net price calculator, which allows you to give you some relief or some understanding of how the college's financial aid process will work if you're looking to do early decision and be locked in because your student has to go to the college. For the early action students, the regular students, the rolling students, those out there that are not doing early decision, on the admissions side, the way it's affecting the financial aid end is if you're doing the common application. On the common app, it's going to ask you for every college in their school-specific section, are you applying for need-based aid? Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. Now, if the school asks you on the common app if you're applying for need-based aid, they're basically asking you, are you looking for us to provide you with financial assistance to attend this university? Now, many colleges are known as need aware, so they don't care if you can afford the college or not. Now, if you want to find out, is the school going to look at us financially being able to afford the college to be able to be accepted? Very simple thing you need to do. Number one, call the school's admissions office and ask them, is your school need aware? Are you looking at us from the fact that can we afford it or can we not afford it? Yes or no. The school is going to tell you right over the phone if you call them or even email the admissions officer if they're looking at you. If the school says to you they don't care if you can afford it or not from the admissions side, the second phone call you want to make is you want to call the financial aid office. You want to call the financial aid office because you want to ask them the same question, need aware. Is your school looking at us from this perspective if we can afford or not for the admission? As long as both groups say you no, you're perfectly fine. Now, that being said, let's talk about building the college list and the things you need to look at when you're building the college list. When you're building a college list from a financial aid perspective, you're going to have safety, target, and reach schools from admissions and a financial aid perspective, both together. Now, the way it works is this, though. From admissions perspective, you're looking at safety schools, the quick ins, we're going to get accepted. There's no questioning, we're going to get accepted. That's what the safety school is from an admissions point of view. From a financial aid point of view, schools we're definitely going to get into, as well as schools are going to provide us with scholarship consideration. And the reason you're looking at the safety schools for the scholarship consideration is because the admissions office is the department that provides scholarship funding, not the financial aid office. That's why you're looking when you're building your school list. For your safety schools, your number one consideration for safety schools should always be, does the school offer scholarship funding, specifically for academics? And the way you find that out, very simple. Call the school's admissions office. Calling the school's admissions office, think of the admissions office or even emailing them. Think of the admissions office as essentially the marketing arm of the college. Now, the way it works is whether you're calling them or emailing them, you can basically right over the phone or via email say, my student has, let's say, a 3.5 GPA out of a 4 scale. Let's say they have a 1200 SAT score if they were even able to take the SATs. Is my student eligible for scholarship consideration? Most admissions offices will tell you right off the bat, yes or no, because most schools have indexes depending on GPA and test scores, what scholarships you're probably eligible for, which provides you with the first level, essentially, of a discount from the college process before you do any financial aid form. So scholarship money is typically the most sought after money because it's typically the easiest to get. There's no financial documentation needs to be filled out. There's no specific incomes. It just requires a certain GPA and test score. The second reason scholarship money is so sought after, it's typically guaranteed for 4 years. It's the best financial aid to have out there. Now, the target schools, from admissions point of view, you're looking at basically a 50-50 shot at getting in. Once again, from a financial aid point of view, you're looking at the target schools also from the scholarship point of view. Are we in the scholarship range? Now, when you call and the school says yes, that you're eligible for scholarship money, the second question you should always ask is, what's the next level? And what I mean by next level is, if you're giving us, based on our academics for the student, a $5,000 scholarship, let's say, what do we need to do to get to the $10,000 scholarship? Is there even a $10,000 scholarship? scholarship. You want to be as open with the questions as much as you can, specifically with admissions, because you want to lock in that scholarship money to get that first discount out of the way that we know is going to be guaranteed for 4 years. That's the safety and target side of the admissions list. On the college list for the reach schools, I guess the dream schools, you're looking at these schools more likely as leverage. And this is what I mean by leverage. You want to use the money from the safety schools and the target schools to leverage their numbers. They're giving you a scholarship funding against the reach school to try to get more money from them from a scholarship perspective. That's why you should be looking at safety and target schools, not just from a getting in perspective and obviously having the major and where your student wants to go, maybe as a backup. You should also look at the safety and target schools as leverage tools to use to get more money out of the reach colleges. And that being said, let's talk about one of the situations that I see even before the whole pandemic and everything else happened. Now, one of the biggest issues that we're seeing, I've seen this basically kind of grow over the last 22 years I've been doing this, working in the college process, is that more and more students than ever before are taking longer than 4 years to graduate a 4-year program because of the fact they're not taking enough college credits. Now, let me explain how this works. Now, when you're dealing with a college and your student goes off to school, goes off in the fall to the university they're going off to, what will always happen, I mean, across the board always happen, is the school is going to provide your student with 12 to 13 college credits. That's the max they typically want to give a freshman. The reason being, and by the way, a full-time student at any college, whether it be an associate's, whether it be a 4-year degree type scenario, every college to be a full-time student that has a fall and spring semester, within that fall or spring semester term, you are allowed to take 12 to 18 college credits. Makes you a full-time student. Now, the way it works is you're paying the same tuition amount, whether your student's taking 12, 15, all the way to 18 credits. You're paying the same tuition amount, which means if the school starts your student off at 12 to 13 credits, what will happen, if you look at the chart here, your student needs over the course of 4 years to accomplish 124 to roughly 128 college credits to graduate in the 4-year time frame. However, if your student starts off with 12 and figures out they have enough time to socialize, hang out, do their homework, etc., and they keep taking 12 every semester, then the problem becomes line number 2. Your student only accomplishes 96 college credits after 4 years, which means they're over 20 credits short of graduating in that 4-year time frame. Your student can take 12 credits the first semester or even 13. That's not a problem. What they need to do, however, is start getting more credits in the mix by following line number 3 we have here on the screen. Your student must average 15 college credits per semester to be able to graduate in the 4-year time frame. If they average 15 college credits by the end of the 4th year, they'll have 120 credits, which means they're in line to graduate in that 4-year time frame. And you're probably wondering, well, why is that so important, Ed, if we add an extra year going from 4 years to 5 years for the undergrad? Main reason being, in the world of college, scholarships are only guaranteed for 4 years. Most grant money, the other free side of financial aid, also only guaranteed for 4 years. So if your student's going off to college and you have a good scholarship, and maybe the school is also giving you grant money, and your student goes into that 4.5 year, that extra semester, or that 5th year, that means you must now pay out of pocket that lost amount of scholarship and grant money, and or take on more loan debt. So obviously your goal is get them in and out in 4 years. So how do we do this as parents? Very simple. Every college has what's known as a FERPA form. FERPA. The FERPA form at the college can be done through the records office, usually the billing office as well, or the bursar's office essentially. Now, the FERPA form allows you to have your student basically sign your name on their FERPA onto their account, which then grants you access to all their information, the academic information, the financial information, so on and so forth. Once your name is on the FERPA form, you can call their academic advisor and ask them questions such as, how many college credits does my student have? How many do they sign up for next semester? Do you see any issues with my student graduating next year, the next year after that? You can even ask them, does my student even go to class? Because a lot of schools keep track of this for financial aid purposes. So as you can see, the FERPA is a good way to kind of keeping track of the student to making sure they're on pace to get in and out in the 4-year time frame. Now, that being said, let's talk about the next big thing that's happening nowadays with the whole pandemic and everything else happening, with more and more schools than ever before going SAT, ACT optional from basically Harvard down. Now, over the last 5 years or so, a lot more schools than ever before have gone SAT, ACT optional, but nothing like now. Now you have close to 1,600 colleges that are SAT, ACT optional out there. What you see on the screen now is fairtest.org, and you also see at the bottom here, fairtest.org/university/optional. If you go here, this provides you with the total list of every SAT, ACT optional college out there. It's actually in alphabetical order. This is actually the page, if you go scroll down a little bit, you'll see every single school out there. Your goal out there, especially from an SAT, ACT point of view, is number one, if your student was not able to take the test, obviously check with the university and college and find out, do they offer SAT, ACT options to be admitted to the university? Number two, if your student is looking at going SAT or ACT optional, the second thing you have to do from a financial point of view is call the school's admissions office and ask them, if we go SAT, ACT optional, will this be used against us for scholarship consideration? This website here is a great tool, especially for the students that couldn't take the test or unable to take the test, or for juniors that aren't scoring well on the test or think they might not score well because they don't do well on tests. This is a resource to utilize. Fairtest.org is a free website I would definitely be utilizing. We also have a YouTube video just on the SAT, ACT optional situation, very in-depth. It goes a lot more in-depth than I will go in here today about how the SAT, ACT option affects not just the financial end, but the admissions end as well. Now, that being said, let's talk about sticker price. Now, a lot of parents out there, obviously, a lot of families out there, we were hoping that the college prices will go down, but unfortunately, they have not gone down. And with everything going on, they're not going to go down. A lot of you are seeing out there that the average public school cost is between $14,000 to $30,000. This is nationwide, by the way. The reality here in the tri-state area, our public universities cost more than almost any other place in the United States as far as state schools are concerned. Here, public schools for us cost between typically $18,000 to roughly around $40,000, unfortunately. From a private school point of view, nationwide, looking at private school costs typically around $35,000 to $50,000. Our private schools typically range in price from $40,000 to $60,000. And making things even worse, from the elite college point of view, the elite colleges being, the top tier universities, the REACH schools, the DREAM schools, etc. You're looking at colleges that cost across the board $55,000 to roughly around $85,000 a year. Now, to give you more of a perspective, let's start talking about, I guess, what you can call the new normal out there, especially with the private universities. As you can see on the screen here, as you can see between Columbia, NYU, and Fordham, you're basically looking at $80,000 colleges. Now, even though the colleges are expensive, do not look at the price tag in deciding whether or not to apply to a college. That's probably the biggest error I see across the board. What you need to do is the homework, which we're going to go over today, is how to figure out if the school is generous or not, and figuring out, does it make sense and is it affordable for your family? Because the reality is most of the students that go off to these universities end up paying less than half this sticker price. So never look at the sticker price in deciding whether or not to apply to a college. That being said, let's talk about, right off the bat, what is financial aid? One of the things that most families don't realize, when you talk about the term financial aid, you have to realize financial aid doesn't just mean free money. Financial aid actually means four things, and it's very important you understand this. Financial aid means scholarships and grants. That's the free money, the money you're not paying back. Gift aid is that term. So if you're talking to a financial aid officer, or you're talking to an admissions officer, and you're talking about scholarships or grants, you need to make sure that if you guys are talking financial aid, and they keep throwing around the term financial aid, and you keep throwing around the term financial aid, you have to make sure that you say to them, when I'm talking about financial aid, I'm talking about the gift aid portion, because gift aid is the financial aid term for grants and scholarships. Gift aid does not include the other two parts of financial aid, because financial aid means scholarships, grants, loans, and work programs. The other two parts of financial aid, the loans and the work portion of it, that's what's known as the self-help portion. So you want to make sure, whoever you're talking to, that you say to them, I want to talk about financial aid, but I want to specifically talk about the gift aid portion only, the grants and the scholarship. Now, that being said, let's talk about how they figure out if you're even eligible for financial aid, the free stuff, the gift aid. Right off the bat, the way you qualify for financial aid of any sort, whether you're looking at county all the way up to Harvard, it's all the same equation. You start off with the cost of attendance. Now, the cost of attendance is what a school costs, everything included. I'm going to show you what goes into that in the next slide. Now, the cost of attendance is another important term you need to be using when you're talking to the colleges. A lot of universities, when you ask them, how much does the university cost, they'll tell you the tuition and room and board cost. That is not the only part of the cost that you're going to be incurring by sending your student off to college. So you want to make sure when you're talking costs with a university, you're always talking about the cost of attendance. Use that term. So you take the cost of attendance and subtract out what's known as the expected family contribution. The expected family contribution is essentially what that college expects you can pay towards the cost of the education for one student for one academic year. The expected family contribution is calculated based on the financial aid forms. You subtract out what you can pay from what the college costs in total. What's left over is the financial need. Now, the financial need is essentially what that college should help you out with in scholarships, grants, loans, and work programs. The reason I say should help you out is because there's no guideline, no rule specifically saying they have to help you out at all. I'm going to go through the whole process of figuring out also how to find out if a college is generous or not generous throughout this presentation. So we're going to get to that in a moment, but realize whatever your expected family contribution is, whatever the financial aid forms say you can pay, don't think of that as the only thing you're paying. Think of that as the minimum amount you're paying, okay? That being said, let's talk about what the cost of attendance is. Cost of attendance is essentially what the school costs for 1 year with everything included. That includes obviously the tuition, the room and board, but it also includes additional fees like new student fees, technology fees, lab fees, parking fees, etc. Also in there are the book costs, the transportation costs to the college in the fall and then back home in the spring. Insurance is also thrown in there as well. Now, the reason the cost of attendance is so important is because you want to know what the total cost of the university is. To get the cost of attendance, very simple. Call up the school admissions office and ask them, I'd like to get the cost of attendance, the total amount. If for whatever reason they can't give you the total cost of attendance, very simple. You go on to collegeboard.org. It's a website I'll be talking about in a moment. On collegeboard.org, they have on there a profile of every single college. You just type in the school's name in the top right search bar, their profile pops up. On their profile, they'll also have the breakdown of every single component of that college, the tuition cost, the room and board cost, the transportation cost, and in many cases, the miscellaneous and book cost. That we have a better sense of what the college costs all together. Because it's better to know up front the school costs $70,000 or $80,000 altogether than later on finding out it costs that because you thought it cost $40,000 or $50,000 based on tuition and room and board. Now, that being said, let's talk about the financial aid forms. This is how the schools essentially get your expected family contribution. These forms here. The two basic forms you'll be filling out. On the left-hand side, you have the FAFSA form. Everyone fills out the FAFSA form. On the right-hand side, you have the CSS profile form. The CSS profile is filled out by some of you, not all of you. For me, pretty much across the board, in 22 years of doing this, I'd say I'd probably met easily 100,000, probably even more than 100,000 families in my career. I think I've told maybe 4, maybe 5 families not to do the FAFSA form for very unique, specific reasons. For me, you always do the FAFSA form no matter what. Number one, you never know what college is going to provide you with aid and which ones aren't. I do because I've been doing this for decades, but most families don't know which colleges are generous or not generous. Now, the other reason you do financial aid forms is because if something happens financially, the first thing the college is going to ask you right off the bat, the first thing they're going to ask you is, did you fill out the FAFSA form? If you didn't fill out the FAFSA form, the school can't help you. It doesn't matter that your accountant or your brother-in-law or your neighbor said don't fill it out, you're not going to get anything. If something happens later on and you did not fill out the form prior, they're more likely not going to be able to provide you with financial aid assistance unless the form is in place, and if you miss deadlines, you might have missed financial aid. So it's best to do the FAFSA form no matter what. Even if you know you're not going to get anything, still just fill out the FAFSA form, kind of just covering yourself just in case later on you need financial aid assistance and you need to do an appeal because of a job loss or financial distress or whatever might happen. If you don't have the FAFSA in place, they can't provide you with aid. Now, that being said, let's talk about, first off the bat, the FAFSA form. Now, when it comes to the FAFSA form, the website you see on the screen here, this is where you fill out the FAFSA form. The FAFSA form is only filled out by senior parents starting October 1st. Typically, you want to get the FAFSA form in before February 15th. So for junior parents, this is all informational today that you're watching this video here. You're only filling out the FAFSA form once your student reaches senior year. After October 1st, you can now start the form beforehand. For senior parents, for 2021 school year that we're in right now, for senior parents, you're going to be using 2019 taxes to fill out the FAFSA. For junior parents, you'll be using the 2020 taxes, which is basically the year we're in now. So you'll be doing this form next year when your students are in senior year, but you'll be using the 2020 taxes. So you might want to start thinking about things you want to do on the taxes to maybe adjust, make things, move things around to hopefully give yourself a better shot of getting more financial aid. Because obviously, the lower your tax numbers, the more likely it is you get financial aid assistance. Now, when it comes to the FAFSA, doing the FAFSA for your student, what you're going to notice is you guys need FSA IDs. The IDs are used to, number one, for the student, sign into the form. And number two, for the parent to also sign into the form and upload your taxes. You must obtain 2 FSA IDs from the website we have down here at the bottom, fsaid.ed.gov. Now, what you notice on the screen is this is actually one of the videos we did because I got so many questions from parents asking, where do we fill out the FSA IDs? How do we fill them out? So what I did was I took about 10 minutes and just created a step-by-step guide. If you go on the YouTube channel, you'll find this video of how to obtain both FSA IDs. You need 2. First one you need for the student You get the student's ID to log into the FAFSA and sign at the end. You get the second ID for the parent. Either parent, you just need one of them. You don't need both parents to get the IDs. You get the second ID for the parent to be able to upload your taxes directly from the IRS. It's called the IRS retrieval process, but you can only do the IRS retrieval process if you have the parent, the second FS-8 ID. Easiest way to do this is watch our video. It'll walk you step by step. It makes it very simple. That being said, let's talk about what the FAFSA counts. What do they want to know on the FAFSA form? Right off the bat, let's talk about what they don't want, because these are where the big errors happen. Number one, the FAFSA does not want to know about your primary home, where you live. It does not care about the equity in that property. It goes nowhere on the FAFSA. The second error, financially speaking, on the FAFSA does not want to know about your retirement accounts, your 401ks, your IRAs, your Roths, your 403bs for the teachers. So the FAFSA form does not want to know the total amount of retirement accounts. The FAFSA does have one question, though, about retirement. That one question is, how much did you contribute the previous tax year? Last year, the amount you put in, that's what FAFSA wants to know about. They do not want to know about your total amount. So let's just say you have $50,000 in a 401k, and in 2019, you put in $2,000 into your 401k. The FAFSA only wants to know about the $2,000 you put in. It does not want to know about, and you do not put on the FAFSA that you have $50,000 in retirement assets. Now, when it comes to the FAFSA form, it does count checking, savings. It does count stocks and bonds outside of retirement, mutual funds, these kind of things. It will also count if you have a second property, a rental property. These are the things that are counted on the FAFSA form. On all financial aid forms, when it comes to the asset question, for the FAFSA, the CSS, and the state questions, and also institutional paperwork for financial aid that some schools ask for, they all ask you the same question. When you're filling out that form, the day you're filling out that form, they're going to ask you how much you have in checking, in savings, and investments. So for the asset portion of this, the financial aid forms, you're giving them the total that you have for that specific day you're filling out the form. Let's talk about the FAFSA form and how it's calculated. What you see on the screen now is the actual expected family contribution calculation. Now, there's about 10 different expected family calculators, essentially, but this is the basic one that most families fall into. I'm gonna start from the bottom and work my way up. There's 4 parts to this. I'm also gonna give you a website at the end, so you don't have to calculate this yourself. This equation here will show you essentially how they come up with your family's expected family contribution, what they expect one student to pay to go off to college for one academic year. Now, starting from the bottom and working our way up, student assets. Students, any assets in their name outside of the retirement assets, if they do have any. Let's say your student has a checking account or a savings account. This is what I mean by assets. So any money they have in their name, 20% of it automatically goes towards the cost of college. So let's say your student has $1,000 in their checking account. So 20% of that, $200, would be part one of the 4 parts that are added together to give you your family's expected family contribution. Part number 2, students' income. Students are allowed to make up to $6,500, and when they're asking for income, they're asking for adjusted gross income. That's going to be asked for both parent and student, by the way, when they ask for income. For students, as long as you made under $6,500 in the tax year required of you on the FAFSA, so for senior parents, you'll be looking at your students' 2019 tax returns. If they made in 2019, if they did work, less than $6,500, none of it counts. Any amount over $6,500, half of that amount above $6,500, they want that to go towards the cost of college. So let's assume, just to give you a number, let's assume your student made $7,000 over the cost of 2019 for senior parents. You put the $7,000 on the FAFSA form, or you use the IRS retrieval for the student as well. The $7,000 you put on there, $6,500 will be backed out. So the machine does it for you. The $6,500 backed out then leaves you with $500. Half of that, or essentially $250, that's part 2 that's added together. Part number 3, parents' assets. And this is where it starts getting a little tricky. As parents, you're essentially given what's known as an asset protection allowance. The asset protection allowance is essentially a certain amount of money outside of retirement and the primary home, because remember, those don't count towards the college cost. So the asset protection allowance is counting the other stuff, like your investments outside of retirement, your checking, your savings, etc. Now, when it comes to the parents' assets, the asset protection amount you have is roughly around $25,000 or so is what they're not counting towards the college expense. And let me give you an example of how it works. Let's say all the money you have in the world is $20,000 in stocks or a CD or a money market, and all the rest of your money is in, let's say, retirement or in the house, which don't count on the FAFSA form. So you put down that you have on the FAFSA form, you put down you have $20,000 in checking. Guess what? That $20,000 doesn't count at all towards the college cost because of the fact that you're under the asset protection allowance for parents of $25,000. Let's say you have more than $25,000. Let's say you put down $50,000 you have in checking or savings or investments outside of retirement. What they'll do is they'll back out the $25,000 for the asset protection allowance. The remaining amount, the other $25,000, they'll assess at a rate of 5.6%. So you start thinking, my students' money, any money they have no protections, and it counts at 20%. As a parent, my money counts at, with the protection, at less than 6%, at 5.6%, which means it's better to have money in the parent's name than it is to have money in the student's name, because you want to have the student showing the least amount of information on the asset side as possible to give you more space for financial aid consideration. Now, part 4, parents' income. Parents' income is essentially a sliding scale. The more you make, the more they expect you to pay towards the cost of college. Now, on the slide here, the typical number ranges between 22 to 47% of your adjusted gross income. Once again, now you're probably wondering, Ed, do I fall in the 20% of my income, 30%, or in the 40s? How do we figure this out? Well, very simple. Kind of a rough draft kind of estimate is this. Look at your adjusted gross income on the front of your taxes. If your adjusted gross income is between $50,000 and $200,000, you guys are in the 20% camp. Once you go over the $200,000, that's when the number starts ratcheting up a little bit. So they add these 4 parts together, and that gives you your expected family contribution. The easiest way to calculate your number is not to follow this equation here. I just do this equation to kind of show you how they break down the expected family contribution. The easy thing to do is go on to College Board. Once again, great website. On collegeboard.org, they have an expected family contribution calculator. Let you play with the numbers. What if we do have money in the student's name? What if we don't? What if the student decides to work next year? What if they don't? What if we make less income? What if we make more income? You can play around with the numbers essentially and figure out what's your best case scenario from a financial aid point of view to get more financial assistance. Utilize the websites we provide you here today. They're all free. They're all very helpful. That being said, let's talk about the next step after you finish the FAFSA form. After you finish the FAFSA form, immediately at the end, you're going to get a confirmation screen that looks exactly like this. And on the confirmation screen, there's going to be 2 blue boxes in the middle. We put an arrow next to the more important one now, which is basically the states are going to require you to fill out additional paperwork if you're looking for state aid. Here in the state of New Jersey, we have a group called Hesaa. Hesaa provides all the state aid for New Jersey students. The Hesaa group itself requires you to fill out an additional form on top of the FAFSA to be eligible for state aid. It can be done immediately at the end of the FAFSA by clicking on the blue box that pops up, which you see here on your confirmation screen at the end of the FAFSA form. By clicking on that box, it brings you right to the Hesaa site, and you can answer the questions immediately. The Hesaa questions typically range from 1 to 5 questions, depending on certain questions and the ways you answered certain things on the FAFSA form. If you fill out the FAFSA form and you're all looking at state schools, whether you're looking at state schools as your reach, target, or even just a safety, maybe even a backup, always fill out the state required forms. You never know, the student could change their mind. As long as you have a state form in place, doesn't matter what school they go to, if it's still in state, they're going to get aid as long as they're eligible for aid. That being said, let's talk about College Board, which is essentially the second form, the CSS profile, but really in a sense, the third form, because we talked about the state form that pops up after the FAFSA form. Now, you fill out the CSS profile form on the College Board site. You log in using the student's SAT login information. So if your student already has an SAT account through College Board, you essentially log into that account to start the CSS profile form. Now, not every school requires a CSS form. Many schools do not require it. There's only about 350 colleges out of 4,000 that require the CSS profile. Most schools do not need it, so most of you will not have to fill this form out. The CSS profile form itself, unlike the FAFSA, is not free. The FAFSA form, there's no payment. The CSS profile, there's a $25 payment for the first school you send the form to, and an additional $16 for each school on top of that. Now, the way the CSS profile works is, once you log into the College Board, which you see here on the screen, you'll see at the top in the bold where it says Big Future, to the right of that, about 4 links over, it says Pay for College. You click on that, and that will then lead you to the CSS profile form. If your student's not already logged in, you have to log in at the next page to basically get them into their CSS profile form. Now, another big difference between the FAFSA and the CSS, the FAFSA form is typically anywhere from 90 to 100 questions. The CSS profile form is anywhere from 350 and 400 plus questions, all depending on the colleges you're applying to, because each college at the end of the CSS profile is allowed to ask you additional questions, making matters even more difficult. Essentially, the FAFSA form, if you make an error, you can come back in and change the error after about 2 days of the form processing. The CSS profile, if you make an error, you cannot go back in and make changes. The form is locked. So for both the FAFSA and the CSS, take your time. Do not rush, specifically with the CSS, because to make changes to the CSS is very difficult, very time consuming. You have to do a lot of different steps. You have to call the school, find out what they want to do to fix it, so on and so forth. So it's always best, take your time, do not rush. If you're confused in the CSS, I always tell parents, if you don't know the number to put down, very simple, put 0, because it's better to be wrong with 0 than just create a number in your own mind that might be wrong, that loses you financial aid. So typically I say use the number 0 if you're looking to put a number in and you don't know the valuation of that situation or asset. That being said, let's talk about what the CSS profile counts. Now, once again, obviously the FAFSA, the CSS profile counts everything. That's why you have the kitchen sink on the screen, essentially. It counts everything the FAFSA does, which is the cash, savings, checking, stocks, bonds, investments outside of retirement. However, it also counts additional things like your primary home. It counts your retirement assets. It will even ask you, some CSS profile schools want to know what car you drive. They will even want to know how much insurance you have on the house, or is any relatives helping pay for college. It goes very in depth. So if you need help with the form, if you're unsure about the form, or you're filling it out and get confused, do not rush through it. Sit down, take your time. The benefit of both FAFSA and CSS is they both have save buttons. Take your time. Now, that being said, we talked about the FAFSA, we talked about the state form, we talked about the CSS profile form. Now, I mentioned before that for early decision students, on the screen here, we have the net price calculator. The net price calculator, if you go on a College Board, there's actually a video that they provide. It's about two minutes long or so here. You go on there, and it's a lot more in depth. We also have on our own channel for YouTube, we also have a YouTube channel that goes in depth about the calculator as well. So if you go on our YouTube channel, you'll see that as well. But basically, the net price calculator is essentially like the expected family contribution calculator, kind of basically saying how much you can afford to pay for college. But the expected family contribution calculator is a broad number. It's going to say this is the minimum they expect you to pay at any college. The net price calculator is different in the sense that it's school specific. So let's say you're applying to a college for early decision and you know that's where you want to apply, but you want to check out the financial aid end of it. Very simple. You go on to that school's website, or you can even just Google the school's name and the term net price calculator, and almost every, if not at this point in time, basically all of them have net price calculators, which lets you, it takes about 10 minutes to fill out. It lets you basically figure out if my student goes to this college, if we get accepted essentially, and I provide my financials, it's going to ask you for income and assets, that kind of stuff. It's going to say, based on this criteria, you're eligible for this amount of financial aid if you attend this college. If you're doing early decision and you do a net price calculator, always print out the PDF at the end of the net price calculator to cover yourself. That way, if the school comes back and provides you less financial aid than you were supposed to get less, you can always go back to the financial aid office. This is one of the appeal things they talk about, where you ask for more money. You can go back to the financial aid office and say, you guys had said to us, based on this PDF from your website, based on your calculations, that you guys would provide us with, let's say, $40,000 of grant money. But we filled everything out. We sent all the financial aid forms in, and you guys only gave us, let's say, $20,000 of financial aid assistance and grant money. We see there's a discrepancy here. We want to make sure this discrepancy is taken care of before we deposit for early decision. Once it is, we feel fine moving forward. It's basically a way of covering yourself, which basically brings us to, we actually did, or I guess I did, a net price calculator to show you how these work and the results at the end. I did Harvard's net price calculator, and now if you look on the screen here, Harvard costs $76,791, essentially an $80,000 college at the end of the day. It has the breakdown of all the different travel expenses, books, everything else. Once again, obviously you want to know the total cost of attendance. We started the net price calculator with the assumption of a family of 4, as you can see here at the bottom, with 1 going off to college, with the parents' adjusted gross income being at $100,000. We also said the parents had, outside of retirement, they had $50,000 of assets. So with a family making $100,000, a family of 4, with 1 student going off to college, with $50,000 in savings, as you look on the right-hand side here, Harvard was able to give this family $64,841,000 of essentially grant money. Harvard calls it scholarship money, but Harvard doesn't do scholarships. So basically, grant money, need-based money. For a family of this financial situation, they're basically paying less than $12,000 to attend Harvard. Now, you're probably wondering, of course, Ed, I would love my family, or essentially my student, to go off to Harvard, but that's not the case. Well, other schools do this as well. Muhlenberg, Franklin and Marshall, Gettysburg, Providence, all extremely generous colleges. Tulane, extremely generous colleges. So I'm not saying that you have to go to the top Ivy League situations to get huge discounts. There are many other colleges that are extremely generous. And how do you find that out? Very simple. Do their net price calculators and figure out how much they're able to give us, and then print that out, because later on, if you need it, you can always appeal based on the net price calculator that you printed out, because the net price calculators they provide you specifically on their websites are using their calculations and how much they should provide for aid for your situation. So you want to have that as backup, kind of just in case scenario. Now, that being said, let's talk about different scenarios out there. Let's say if you're separated, divorced, or married, or remarried, how does this all affect the financial aid process? Well, first, let's talk on the FAFSA side. If you're divorced or separated on the FAFSA side, or let me explain how FAFSA works. Once you start doing the FAFSA form, remember, you're doing the FAFSA form as the student. You're filling it out for them, but as a student. So about halfway through the FAFSA form, it's going to ask for the parent's marital status. And there's a few answers. Answer number 1 is divorced or separated. Answer number 2 is married or remarried. Answer number 3 is never married. Answer number 4 is widowed. And then answer number 5 is unable to provide information. Now, if you indicate the parent is divorced or separated, that's technically the same answer, which means in the world of financial aid, by the way, if you're separated for 3 months, it's the same thing as being divorced. It's just the way it works. It's the way it's been forever and never, never. So if you indicate on the FAFSA form the student's parents are divorced or separated, another question pops up. The second question is going to ask you is, who does a student live with 51% of the time or more? They want to know who is basically housing the student the majority of the time, not who's providing the most support, by the way. So if you indicate the student's living with mom 51% of the time, what that basically does is it then eliminates all dad's questions. So if you say the student's living with mom 51% of the time, all dad's questions for his income and assets are erased. They will not be asked of you on the FAFSA form, which is obviously good, bad, or indifferent, a good situation on a financial point of view to get more financial aid because you're showing less income. Now, problem is if you're remarried, the step parents information on the FAFSA does get added, whether they've adopted your student or they've been married for a week, it doesn't matter. If you guys are remarried, the new step parent, step mom, step dad, their information goes on the FAFSA, good, bad, or indifferent. Now, on the CSS profile, it's different. On the CSS profile, it's school dependent, which means if the family is separated or divorced, let's say you guys are both divorced, you have to check with the financial aid office and ask them, do you guys require the CSS profile for both custodial and non-custodial parents? Because if the school says, yes, we require both, that basically means you both are filling out the CSS profile, so you each are doing essentially 400 questions. And if this is the case, you have to be on the same page. You have to be talking about what they're putting on and what you're putting on. But unfortunately, as well as that on the CSS, if you're both remarried, they technically want on the both CSSs all 4 parents' information, both biological and both step parents. So in some cases, financial aid will be difficult to come by if you are looking at CSS profile schools and you're divorced and you're remarried. Unfortunately, their information does get added into the mix. Let's talk about another scenario we see often. One of the questions that was asked of us to basically talk about here in today's presentation, what happens if we have students going to college at the same time, essentially students overlapping in college at the same time? Believe it or not, students overlapping in college is actually extremely beneficial. And you'll see why here on the screen. Let's assume you have one student going off to college. Maybe they're both going at the same time or one's going in a year after. But we have one student going in. We're just going to use the one student first as an example. So one student going off to college, let's say the total cost of the school's attendance is $35,000, just to use even numbers just to make the math easy. Let's say you fill out all the financial aid forms, and the financial aid forms say you can pay $20,000 towards the cost of college. That gets subtracted out. That means you have $15,000 financial aid assistance that the school can help you with. Let's say next year, your other student goes into college, or you have twins going at the same time. So you have 2 students going in, and by the way, they do not need to go to the same college. One could be going to County, one could be going to Harvard. They're still going to college, still the math works the same way. So 2 students going off to college, we're just going to say that each school costs $35,000 just to make the math easy for everybody. So both schools cost $35,000, subtract that out. Sorry, that equals basically $70,000, 2 students, $35,000 apiece. Let's say you fill out all the financial aid forms again, and all your numbers are roughly the same. And what I mean by roughly the same as far as income and assets, I mean a 10% difference between one way or another. It's kind of the way the colleges look at it. So your numbers are roughly in the same range. They ask you once again to pay $20,000. However, the difference here is you're paying $10,000 for student one and $10,000 for student two, you're still paying $20,000 in total. However, student one went from having $15,000 of financial aid space to get help with to now they have $25,000 of financial aid space. So having students in college overlap is extremely beneficial, because of the fact that it provides more space for more financial aid consideration. So students overlapping is very helpful most of the time when it comes to college costs, as well as receiving additional financial aid assistance. That being said, let's talk about the frequently made errors on the financial aid forms. This also happens, by the way, on the admissions forms. The biggest 4 errors, number 1 through 4, first name, last name, social, and birthday. Those 4 things have to be correct on the admission and financial aid form. And what I mean by first and last name, I mean no nicknames. Double check if you're remarried. Did they change Social Security name? The Social Security card as well to that name. These are the things you want to make sure are correct. The social as well. There's always a thing that pops up every year where if you go on the common application or the applications for admissions that say that the social is not needed. The social is definitely needed on the admissions applications. That's how they link up financial aid forms with admissions forms. So make sure that you put the social on the admissions paperwork. That's a big error that happens kind of unfortunately a lot of times because admissions offices say they don't need it, but the reality is they need it to be able to link financial aid forms with admissions forms. Also on there as well, the birthday. If you do not know your spouse's birthday, they don't know your birthday, your student doesn't know your birthday, make sure the birthday is correct. The birthday is a big error that happens all the time. You don't want to get this wrong. The biggest delays that happen in financial aid are those 4 big errors. Now, another big error I'm seeing specifically over the last couple of years, because we have a lot more older students staying at home after they've graduated college longer than before, staying until they're 22, 24, 25, etc. If you have a student, or let's just call it a child, your older child, who's graduated college, they're living at home, okay? And you have another student going off to college, and that student who's already graduating, let's say they have a job. And you're probably thinking when you're filling out the financial aid forms that when you're filling out the financial aid forms, I don't need to put them on the FAFSA as part of the household. Incorrect. Until that student or until your child is 24 years or older, you count them on the FAFSA form and the CSS profile form. Because the way that college works as far as the financial aid forms is they count the household in 3 different ways. Number 1, on the financial aid forms, they're going to ask you, how big is your household size? How many people in the household? And the first thing they're going to ask you on all the financial aid forms. The second thing they're going to ask you is, how many people going off to college? How many students going off to the undergrad program? The third thing they're going to ask you on all financial aid forms is, how many exemptions do the parents have on the taxes? The interesting thing is, the third thing, the exemptions, do not matter for financial aid, do not matter for calculating your expected family contribution. The first 2 matter, how many people in the household and how many people going to college. That's what actually affects your expected family contribution number. So you want to make sure to count older students in the household, even if they're working, even if they're making more money than you. It doesn't matter. Until the age of 24 above, you count them as part of the household. It obviously helps you in the entire process. That being said, let's talk about more from an admissions point of view, but also somewhat on the financial point of view, the social media landmines I see that happen year after year after year. Based on everything that's happening, you've probably already read in the news that students are already being expelled and suspended and thrown out of campus for having, parties and not doing social distancing and so on and so forth. That's what's happening now in the college. Before your student gets into the college, the admissions officers are looking at their Facebook pages, their LinkedIn pages, their TikToks, everything, their Instagrams. The admissions people are going on there because it's one of the ways they basically eliminate candidates. Make sure, specifically for students out there who are looking at competitive colleges from an admissions point of view, if you want to keep everything on your social media page, perfectly fine, but make it private. Do not let anyone have access to it, especially when you're sending out applications, because this happens every year. And this also happens after you've been accepted. I've seen it, you probably have seen it in the news as well. You always have the news articles where they say, X amount of students, 20, 30 students were accepted to Harvard. They liked something or they posted something that wasn't so funny, or people thought it was provocative, or people didn't like, and all of a sudden those people aren't going to Harvard anymore. It happens every year. This is also from a financial point of view. You want to make sure that from a financial point of view, you're also not doing this either, in the sense that when you fill out all the financial aid forms and everything else, If you're posting stuff up there that doesn't make sense to the financial aid officer, if they're doing in-depth looking to you from a point of view of verification, this could also be something that kind of shoots yourself in the foot. So from a social media point of view, you want to have on there, either make everything private or don't post anything on there that someone else might take the wrong way. That being said, now that we talked about frequently made errors, now that we talked about the social media landmines, let's talk about the scams out there, the frauds out there. Now, one of the biggest scams out there, specifically from a financial aid point of view, is scholarship searches that you pay for. You never pay for a scholarship search because of the fact that most scholarship searches, number one, right off the bat, are free. There's no reason for you to pay for these things. The second, I guess, from a financial point of view, from a scam point of view, you never pay outside of the CSS profile. You never pay for any financial aid forms directly to the organization. So if you're filling out the FAFSA form, and at the end of the FAFSA form, it asks you for a credit card, you're on the wrong site. As you can see here, we actually have the website here for studentloans.gov, a great resource, also part of the FAFSA process through the federal government. On the website here, if you go on there, it details all the different scams out there, from loan scams to scholarship scams and pretty much everything in between. This is a good website to utilize to find out and look for additional scams out there, because there have been scams for years and years and years. And typically, unfortunately, it always happens. I hate to say it, but when there's always some kind of incident, when something bad happens in the world, there's always way more scams out there. So you want to make sure to avoid as many things as possible. One of the news scams that I saw was an email scam where colleges supposedly were sending an email asking for bank records or a bank link or a routing number for students to get the CARE Act money. No university is going to ask for your routing number. They're just not, okay? That was a big scam that happened about 3 months ago. I've also been told by parents who are getting phone calls saying that they're calling from the university, same thing, asking for bank account information, asking for credit card information to make sure you get all your CARE money from the CARE Act, because the U.S. government gave money to the universities based on the CARES Act. No one from the university is going to call you asking for a routing number. They're never going to do that. They're never going to ask for a credit card. They're never going to call you and ask for a checking account. No university will ever ask you, call you directly and say to you, give us money. They never will. Even if you owe them money for the bill, they're not going to call you. It just does not happen. So this happens, and the people on the phone, I've been told, are very aggressive. If they're obviously aggressive, this is not the university. This is a scam. Be aware. This is happening a lot more, unfortunately, because of everything happening in the world. Unfortunately, this typically happens every time we have some kind of big event in the world. Negative event, unfortunately. Now here, on this slide here, we have Cornell University. And I use a slide, I've been using a slide probably now for 20-something years, because Cornell is extremely generous. And once again, I obviously understand that some of the families out there might not be sending their students off to Cornell. But the reason I use the Cornell slide here is to explain why, number one, you never take schools off the list based on price. You always do the homework first and find out, is the school generous? Can we afford it? And number two, never assume that a public university or a state school costs less at the end of the day than a private school that costs a lot more. As you can see here, Cornell costs over $79,000, $79,443 to be exact. Let's say you fill out all the financial aid forms that are required, and the financial aid forms indicate that your expected family contribution says you can pay $10,000 towards the cost of college, which means your financial need to attend that institution is $69,443. That means at Cornell, because Cornell meets 100% of need, that Cornell will actually provide you with $69,000 plus of financial aid assistance, because they're extremely generous. So you're probably wondering, once again, obviously, Ed, well, we would love to send our student off to Cornell, but our student's not going to get into Cornell. How is this affecting us or helping us? Very simple. The fact that I know that Cornell meets 100% of need, I can figure out what every school's need is, what every school meets in financial aid by doing one thing. Going on to College Board, typing in the school's name in the search bar, clicking and opening the profile, then clicking on their financial aid link on the profile, and it shows me exactly how much every college provides for financial aid for families out there. So I can know right off the bat which colleges are generous, which colleges are not generous. I can also do the net price calculator I talked about before to also figure out which colleges are generous or not generous. So don't automatically take schools off your list because they cost too much. Do the research first. Go on College Board. Do the calculators. Also go and do the net price calculators as well. And also, if you want, watch our videos on YouTube. We have a lot of videos of figuring out how the colleges basically operate as far as are they generous or not generous, and also where to go out and get additional funding outside of the colleges. Now, that being said, let's talk about the award letter. The award letter is essentially what happens after your student has been accepted, after you've done all the financial aid paperwork, you start receiving what are known as award letters. The award letters will arrive typically 2 weeks and then after your student has been accepted to the college. The award letters will have the scholarships, the grants, the loans, and the work programs. This is essentially the entire award basically saying to you, this is what you will receive if your student attends this university. So think of the award letter as basically the college saying, you come here, we're going to give you this. The award letter basically also dictates the negotiation starting point, or basically where you start the appeal process. And one of the ways you typically do an appeal right off the bat is, let's say college A, where you really want to go, your student really wants to go, has offered your student a $5,000 grant or scholarship. But school B, the equivalent, or I guess the rival, or I guess your second choice your student wants to go to, has offered you a $10,000 scholarship or grant. What you do is you go back to school A. When you're appealing, by the way, you can appeal directly through the financial aid office, whether you're appealing scholarships or grants, and say to them, this is a school choice. This is where I really want to go. However, school A, you guys are giving us $5,000. But school B here, one of your competitors possibly, is offering us $10,000 in scholarship or grant money. Is there any way you can match the number? And that, by the way, is how you start the negotiation, by saying, can you match the number? Never say to them, you gave us 5, they gave us 10, can we meet in the middle? Always start with, can you match the number? Typically what will happen is, best case scenario, number 1, they'll match the number. Second best case scenario, they'll maybe meet you halfway. If they meet you halfway, let's say you said they give you 5, the other school gave you 10, and they say, okay, we're going to meet you and give you $7,500. At that point, that's when you say, that's great. Can we get it up to $8,500? Can we meet in the middle? That way you might be able to get, and I've seen this actually work, an extra $1,000 by letting them come back first. That's the way you want to look at the appeal. Now, when it comes to appeals, there's actually 3 different things that can happen with appeal. Number 1, you get more money. Obviously, the thing that everybody wants. Number 2, you don't get more money. They just say no to you. But there's actually a third thing that can happen if you appeal, which a lot of families don't realize. And it's one reason we actually made a YouTube video just on appeals. Excuse me. The third thing that can happen if you appeal is they can actually take away money. So before you do any appeals, you want to make sure that your situation makes sense. And what I mean by that is, number 1, did everything you put on the financial aid forms make financial sense? Such as, if you have a tax return, and on your tax return, it shows a lot of interest and dividends, but on the financial aid forms, you forgot to put that down, that you have a lot of investments. Maybe you didn't put any investments down, and for whatever reason, they didn't catch it. If you do an appeal, a human being steps in and just looking at your information. If they catch that and they think that you didn't put enough information on there, you could actually lose aid. If you want to get an overview of how appeals work, when to do them, when not to do them, once again, go on our YouTube channel. We have a video just for doing appeals. Now, that being said, let's talk about the loan options. We also received a question from another parent as well about us discussing the loans. Now, when it comes to student loans, there's basically 3 different loans you'll be dealing with throughout the entire process. Right off the bat, the minute you guys fill out the financial aid form, the FAFSA form, your student's automatically eligible for $5,500 in federal direct loans. Now, of the $5,500 they'll be getting to go off to college, all that needs to be done is fill out the FAFSA. That's it. There's no credit requirement, no job requirement, nothing. They just need you to fill out the FAFSA form, and your student's automatically offered a $5,500 federal loan. The $5,500 federal loan is in the student's name. It's paid back 6 months after the student graduates. They can pay it back over 10, 20. They can even extend it up to 30 years of repayment on the monthly basis. Now, the federal direct loan, once again, in the student's name. The second loan you're all going to get accustomed to hearing is called the PLUS loan. The PLUS loan is a federal loan that's provided to you. First, you have to fill out the FAFSA form. That's one of the first requirements of the PLUS loan. Second, the student's parent, mom or dad, must apply for the PLUS loan. The PLUS loan isn't automatically given to you. The PLUS loan, I like it and I don't like it. I like the PLUS loan right off the bat, right because of the fact that it's got the lowest credit requirement. So if you have any credit issues or any of that kind of situation, I would probably apply for the parent loan first. Second reason I like the parent loan, it lets you apply for as much as you need. So if you need $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to cover the remaining balance of the student's college bill, take out as much as you need. Now, the reasons I don't like the PLUS loan, the interest rate for this academic year, 2021, is starting at 5.3%, which is very high considering the financial environment we find ourselves in. On top of that, a second reason I don't like the PLUS loan is it has an origination fee of over 4%. It's almost 4.4% origination fee, which means you're paying roughly, if you take out, let's say, a $10,000 loan or a $20,000 loan, let's say a $30,000 loan. If you took out a $30,000 loan out, you're paying over $1,200 in fees to take out the PLUS loan at a 5.3% interest rate. Not a great situation. Now, when it comes to the private lenders, this is where it's become an interesting situation because nowadays in the financial environment we find ourselves in, there are actually some private lenders out there that rates start as low as 1.25% without any origination fees, any fees attached. So we're talking about basically 1/4 of where the parent PLUS loan is starting off with interest rates. Now, if you are looking for loan help or you're looking to pay for loans for your student this year, 2021, or even next year, 21-20 academic year for college, send us an email. We do have a ranking list of all the loans out there. We actually do this every year for parents. We create a list. We basically figure out who the best lenders are, who offers the best terms and interest rates, and then rank them. And then any parent who asks for the ranked student loan list, we just email it to you guys. It's easy enough. You guys, we even put the links on there to make it easy for you guys. Just click on the links to apply for the loans. But these are the things to consider when you're looking at the student loan options. Right off the bat, your student will be offered $5,500 in their name. Just fill out the FAFSA, that's all required. Second, if you're looking at the private loans or if you're looking at additional loans, obviously in addition to the direct loans the students are getting, I'm probably leaning more towards the private loans this year because the interest rates are so low. If you have a credit issue or you can't get a good loan on the private side, then I'm looking at the parent PLUS loans. That being said, we at this organization here, Principia Prep, every month send out a newsletter. The newsletter is for seniors, juniors, sophomores. Each newsletter we send out each month is grade specific. It tells you exactly what you need to be doing that month, whether it be admissions or financial aid. We detail everything in the newsletter. If you want the newsletter detailing what you need to be doing for your student each month going forward, very simple. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you my email. Just email our organization. Let us know what high school you're from, what grade level they're at, and what email you want the newsletter to go to, and then we'll send you the newsletter out every month detailing what you need to do every single month. That being said, scholarships. There's also another question that popped up, another question that was sent in by another parent asking us to go more in detail with the scholarships. Now, when it comes to scholarships, there's basically 3 levels of scholarships out there. There's college scholarships, there's private scholarships online, and then there's what's known as basically the local scholarships, the third category, or stuff you kind of get through the guidance office, through the high school. Now, when it comes to college scholarships, most of this money is going to be coming from 2 sources, the endowment or the alumni. Now, you're probably thinking, well, Ed, doesn't the alumni fund the endowment? But there's 2 reasons that there's 2 different categories of scholarships in college. One is alumni-based, one is endowment-based. Most scholarships, all your student needs to get the scholarships at most colleges is apply, they get accepted, they'll either be offered a scholarship or not. That's the money coming out directly from the endowment. The second category of scholarships, from the college point of view, in some cases needs more paperwork. And the reason why it needs more paperwork is because the alumni that gave this money that went into the endowment had put certain criteria onto the scholarship, such as you have to be from a certain background, or you have to be going for a certain major, or you have to be a female or a male, or you have to be studying a certain course load or whatever it may be. If you want to find out if a school offers additional scholarships in addition to the scholarships they're already given you, ask the admissions office. And when it comes to alumni scholarships with certain criteria, some of these require additional essays, some require interviews, some require other stuff on top of that as well. So always ask the admissions office, besides the academic scholarships I might be getting, are there any other scholarships I might be eligible for based on major or background or I'm coming from New Jersey or from New York or Pennsylvania, etc. Remember, the admissions office is the marketing arm of the college. They'll answer any questions you have, especially when it comes to scholarship money. In addition, you can even ask the college admissions office, so can they get scholarship money if they make, let's say, the dean's list, or if they're doing well academically, or if they're going into a certain major or a certain field. There's scholarships my students a sophomore or a junior here in college. You want to find out from the college every resource they have for scholarships, because you want to maximize that money, because obviously it's free, and also the fact that in many cases it's going to be given to you more than 1 year. Second level of scholarships to look for is through the scholarship searches. Now, I have heard out there and I have looked at a lot of different scholarship searches out there. You have Remarried, you have scholarships.com, you have CapX, you have Scholly. But for me, over 22 years doing this, for me, the best two out there have been and always will be and still continue to be the two you see on your screen, FastWeb and FinAid. These two scholarship searches are free. Once again, do not pay anyone for scholarship searches. These two are the two biggest and oldest scholarship searches out there. They're very in-depth, and most of the stuff you'll find on meritaid.com and scholarships.com, as well as CapX and all the rest of them, are typically all incorporated on these two websites here. Now, the third level of scholarships out there is the local scholarships, which are the easiest scholarships to get. The PTA scholarship, the local realtor scholarship, all of this stuff you have to go through the guidance office. Typically, I tell parents, contact the guidance office and ask them, when will the scholarship list be provided to the students? Usually this is the easiest list of scholarships to apply for. Number one, because competition level is condensed to that high school only. I've been doing this 22 years. A lot of the time I go to a lot of these scholarship nights that are provided by the guidance office for the local scholarships, and it seems like it's always the same 5, 6, 7, 10 students. They win everything because no one else applies, because the scholarship was only 200 or only 500. These scholarships add up very quickly. And a big benefit that most families don't realize is when it comes to local scholarships, most of the time when they give you a scholarship to your student, it's written to your student's name. If you get a scholarship from the online resources, like Coca-Cola, these scholarships, they will send a check directly to the university. Good, bad, or indifferent, if the university is also giving you a scholarship, they may elect to reduce the scholarship they've already given you and just basically replace it with the scholarship you won outside. So another thing you want to do on top of all of this is, if you know you might be eligible for a local scholarship or a large scholarship from an outside resource outside of the college itself, always contact the school's financial aid office and ask them this question. If we get a scholarship at your college, let's say for $10,000, and we find another scholarship somewhere else, will you reduce our scholarship here? Yes or no. Be very open and honest with them, especially if they're going to get the check directly from the other organization. Also, if you don't want to take the outside scholarship and just keep the college scholarship, you can also decline the outside scholarship. But local scholarships, the big benefit is if they write the check in your name, which a lot of them do, you don't have to tell the university, because you can use that money for books, transportation, that kind of stuff, a laptop. Now, that all being said, let's talk the resources. Additional resources online. Obviously, you have the FAFSA resource, the FAFSA online for the parents out there. Senior parents, you're filling out the FAFSA starting October 1st. That's when you can start filling it out. Typically, you want to get the FAFSA form in before February 15th. You just think your time frame for the FAFSA is October 1st to February 15th. And also for senior parents, the College Board site, not just for the CSS profile, but also for a lot of great resources and a lot of information out there, also free. Also on the College Board, they have the EFC calculators, they have the net price calculators, they have the college cost. Very great website and also free. You can go to either collegeboard.org or collegeboard.com. The websites basically own both sites, so either one works. Once again, scholarship searches, FastWeb and FinAid, and do not pay for scholarships online. Or for any groups, do not pay for scholarships. It's a waste of money and time. You can find them all yourself for free out there by yourself. If you're looking for additional resources, we do have a Facebook page. If you follow us on our Facebook page, we post constantly new content, new things happening in the world of admissions, financial aid, testing. We post stuff on Facebook all the time. Also on our Facebook page, we also post where we're going to be doing our next presentation. So if you're interested in seeing another presentation, whether it be online like we're doing now for a few dozen people here, or if you also want to see us in person, which we will be doing maybe in the spring, some presentations, follow us on Facebook. All you need to do is go on to Facebook and type in Principia Prep and basically follow us. That way you get the information as well as know what other schools we're going off to. Also, if you're looking for additional content or if you want us to make additional videos, go on our YouTube channel. You basically go on YouTube, type in Ed Zamora, subscribe to our channel. It'll notify you of new videos coming out. We've done about 30 videos now on YouTube on specific college topics, admissions, financial aid, the testing, everything, even the essays we've talked about. That being said, here's our contact information. Once again, I'm Ed Zamora from Principia Prep. Here's our email. If you want the newsletter, just log on, email us, letting us know you want the newsletter, letting us know what year you're in, your student, and the high school, and what email you wanted to go off to. Also, the YouTube channel has a lot of information on there that goes even more in depth than what I've done here. Thank you for watching the video. Once again, Ed Zamora from Principia Prep. And once again, if you have additional questions, email us or send us a phone call or an email or a text message. If you do need help with the financial aid forms, we do help with those. Just shoot us a call or shoot us an email. The number you see on the screen is actually my cell phone number. Everyone thinks I'm out of my mind for giving my cell phone number out, but it's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Actually, the easiest way to get a hold of me is send me a text message. It's text message, email, then phone call. Easiest ways to get a hold of me. If you need help with the financial aid forms, we are available. Other than that, I'd like to thank the high school once again for having us.